are now going into the analysis proper. And since we have all the columns that we need here on this main table, remember this table is called what? Sales table. Sales underscore table. Okay. So when you now want to start your analysis, all you just have to do is go to the table design at the top. Okay. The first time you want to use a pivot table, because what you'll be using, okay, for your analysis is a pivot table. So this is now the intro to pivot table. Okay, so hello guys and welcome to our pivot table class. Okay, so now before we go into analyzing this data with a pivot table, what does a pivot table do? A pivot table summarizes data in a spreadsheet. It is used for analysis and visuals. It gives holistic analysis of the variables. Summarizes data into different categories, helps to carry out some analysis, summarize data, and also helps to visualize data. An interactive way to quickly summarize a large amount of data to gather insights on data. Insights. Okay. So now, like you have rightly said, pivot table helps you or helps us to summarize large amounts of data. And in this class, we've done something that has to do with summarizing data in this program. Okay, what aspects? When did we do that? When did you see something that has to do with summarizing your data? Let me see if anybody will get that. Aggregates, beautiful, some ifs. Aggregate, some ifs. Good, good. It shows we are getting this. Okay. So what is now the function of pivot table when we've already seen how to do our sum if, count if, and all of that? Okay. What do we now do? Oh, very simply now. All right. Very simply, we're going to just take a look at pivot table, which is a tool that allows us to do the same thing that sum ifs, count ifs does, that doesn't require us using a formula. Okay, so you don't have to start typing your formula. You see all those formulas that some of you were stressed about, sum ifs, and you now be looking for the range you want to sum, the range you want to perform criteria on, this criteria, that criteria. Imagine you're performing like 4 different criteria. What's going to happen? Okay, so the pivot table takes out that stress. It just requires just know the column you want to use for analysis. Let me bother about the formula, okay, and give you the results. Do you get? Okay, so let's start. I'm going to click on here, the table. And before you use a pivot table, I usually advise my students to first convert their range of data, because the pivot table will be working with every column you have in your data. Okay, so convert your entire range of data into a regular table. All right, convert your entire range of data into a regular table. So we've already done that, and we've named the table sales table. Okay, now clicking on the table, coming up to table design tab, we're going to come to where I have summarize with pivot table. Summarize with pivot table. So I'm going to click on it, and it will ask me new worksheet or existing worksheet. So if I want to place the pivot table on a new worksheet, I'll leave it like this. If I want to place it on an existing worksheet, meaning a worksheet that I already have in my model, I'll click on existing worksheets. But I'll leave it on new worksheet and I'll click OK. Okay. Do you see that? All right. So I'm going to be doing a bit of talking quickly, maybe the next 5, 7 minutes, so that I explain the concept of this pivot table to you. Okay. Now, I need you to pay attention quickly. You understanding this aspect would greatly determine how well you'll be able to analyze data. Okay. Now, when you insert a pivot table on a new sheet or in a particular area on your sheet, now, once you insert your pivot table, okay, and it brings you here, there are certain things that you want to know about this interface. Number one is that you are still on your Excel spreadsheet. Okay, this is the pivot table here. It is associated with the pivot table fields. Okay, this is how bold it can go. Please zoom in from your screen if you are. All right. So now, this pivot table here, you see what you have here that it calls it pivot table 1. All right. It is associated with what you have on this right hand side, pivot table fields. Okay. Now, for you, yours is going to look like this. So let me just do how yours is going to look. This is how yours is going to look. Pivot table fields, and then you have it in this format or in this structure. Okay. I'll come back here. Now, if you click on any cell outside this pivot table, see something. If I click on a cell outside this pivot table, it looks as if I'm back on my normal Excel formula. Okay, so what do we do? If you click on anywhere in your spreadsheet, you see that it looks like you are back on your normal spreadsheet. Something wrong with this Excel is okay. So you see that it looks like you are back on your normal Excel spreadsheet. Okay, your ribbon tabs appear the same way as well. But once you click on your pivot table back, bam, it brings out this pivot table fields for you. And at the top, if you look at your ribbon tabs, you see that you have pivot table analyze, and you also have design. Pivot table analyze, and you have design. So these two new tabs are associated with your pivot table. So the same way on your normal table, when you click on your normal table, it shows you table design. That's the tab that it adds for you. If you click outside, it disappears. That table design will disappear. Okay. If you click inside, it comes back. You have table design. Okay. So the same way you have this table design tab associated with a regular table in Excel, is the same way you have these two tabs associated with a pivot table Okay. Now, on your pivot table fields, you have the fields in your data. If you look at this, you will notice that these are the columns, the column names in your data sales. These are the column names. If you look at it. Okay. So these are the column names in my sales data. And this is what I'm going to be using for my analysis. These columns. Okay. They are majorly what I will be using for my analysis. All right. At the bottom here, I have 4 areas. I have filters, I have columns, I have rows, and I have values. Filters, columns, rows, and values. Okay. These areas are where you will drag a particular field to in order to perform your analysis. All right. Now, I don't like mine showing like this. That's the reason why I changed the settings up here. Click on settings and I change it to this second one like this. Okay. So I can see very well the fields and then I have my areas. Okay. So I like mine like this. So if you want to change yours, you can do that as well, or you can leave it. Okay. Now, in order to analyze the data, should I go there now? No, let's do something quickly. I think one will perform one analysis. That will be the last aspect I'll look at, then round off the class. So now click on my pivot table. At the top, I have pivot table analyze and design. Let's explore that tab. Let's click on the pivot table analyze tab. Now, when you generate an analysis on a particular pivot table, you can rename that pivot table, give it the name of the analysis you did if you want. Okay? Give it the name of the analysis that you did if you want. All right. Number 2, here we have slicer. I will still talk about slicer either in the next class or upper class. Then here we have refresh. What the refresh does is this. If you make changes to this data, okay, the rows in this data, if you make any change, for instance, you had new set of data. Let's say this data currently is showing for only 2014 to 2019. Now, you now bring 2020 sales data, you add it to the bottom of this table, and you want to see the analysis because in the analysis you did before, it's only 2014 to 2019 that you have. So you had the sales for each year from 2014 to 2019. Now, once you add new data to your sales sheet, what you just have to do is just come to your pivot table and click refresh. That pivot table that was giving you 2014 to 2019 sales will now include 2020 sales as well automatically. Okay. And once it does that, you are beautiful and good to go. You see that? Okay. Now we have field items and sets. I'll talk about this as well in the next class. And then here you have pivot chart. You have pivot charts. Okay, that's when you want to make use of visuals. You want to connect a visual to your pivot table. You want to visualize the analysis that you've run on your pivot table. Okay, now field list is what you have here, these pivot table fields. If you click any cell outside, you see that that pivot table fields will disappear. If you click on your pivot table, it pops up back. But in any case where you have mistakenly closed this pivot table field by clicking here, so now when you click a cell outside and you click on your pivot table, it does not pop up. What you just need to do is come to your pivot table analyze tab and then go to where you have field list. You click on field list and it pops out. Okay, so these ones are useful when you have your analysis done. Now let's come to design. Design just helps you change some basic looks about your pivot tables. Okay, the color, you can do that here, and we'll look at this as well later on. Now let's look at one analysis. Okay, let's look at one particular analysis, okay, to introduce us into pivot table. Okay, I'm just going to look at one, and that is where I'm going to wrap the class off. We said we have evaluating sales performance and we have some things we want to see. Okay, so let's see sales performance by country. Sales performance by country. I'm going to come back to my sheet 2. I have the pivot table. How do I do the sales performance by country? I need to sum the sales. I need to get the total sales. Okay, I need to get the total sales for each country. Now, how do I know which countries are in my data? I have a column for country. I will drag this country to rows. When I drag it to rows, it will tell me each country I have in my data. This is the proper way to have it. If you drag country to columns instead, this is how it will put it. But remember, this is not how we did our sum if or count if. It was aligned on rows like this, where we have father, mother, son, daughter. We now did the sum ifs. So I will have my country on rows. Okay. If you put country in values, it will not give you the country. It will just count the number of rows you have in the data. Okay. So your country will either go to rows or columns, but most preferably rows. All right. And I want to see the sales amount, sum of sales amount. I will drag the sales amount to values. And once I drag it to values, because it is a quantitative data, it automatically takes the sum. Do you see that? So without using sum if or count if, I have the sales amount for each country. Okay. So also I can get the sales amount for every other variable here, and then also do some extensive analysis by comparing more than one column against the sales value. Okay, so we'll look at exploring editing some certain things about your pivot table in the next class, work on some certain kinds of filtering, advanced filtering on pivot tables as well, and one or two other things. Okay, but what I remember, this pivot table, if you come to pivot table analyze, you can rename it here. I'll call this sales by country without putting any space. Sales by country. So if you want a new pivot table, click a cell outside, most preferably to the right of the other pivot table. Okay, click that cell, come to insert and click pivot table. Now you want to insert a pivot table inside this existing worksheet. That is why it is here. In this worksheet, in that cell, you want to insert a pivot table. Your pivot table needs to be able to summarize which data? the data on the sales table. So I will type sales table here, sales underscore table, that table that we named on this sheet. That is the table that we want to summarize. So that's what I type here, and I click OK. So it gives me another pivot table. Then I will now do what? Analyze any other thing I want to analyze. Maybe sales by product name, sales by state, and so on and so forth. Do we have any question?
Endeavor to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Thank you. See you in our next class. Bye-bye.